It's Transfer Tuesday on the Podcast Daily, round 2. I thought we might be done with that in December, but it turns out there's a fresh wave of players leaving the Ohio State program. So let's get into it here on TPD. The first one of 2024, that's Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward, and I don't know, 2 relatively surprising moves for me, or at least potential higher impact moves, and then some that probably wouldn't come as a major surprise. But Bill, lead us through the process here. What have we got since the Cotton Bowl?
Well, the starting punter has decided he wants to leave after having probably the best game of his career. So, strike while the iron's hot. That's good for him. For Jesse Mirko, who's entered the transfer portal. Jaden McKenzie, veteran defensive tackle. More of a reserve guy for the defense is in the transfer portal. And then, am I missing anyone else besides the 2 young receivers? Did I forget somebody?
No. Yep, Noah Rogers and Bryson Rogers.
As we record this prior to the college football playoff games on Monday afternoon. So if anything happens on Monday night, folks, we're sorry. We'll talk about it later.
We will. Noah Rogers and Bryson Rogers, 2 members of the 2023 recruiting class, who are gone after a couple months on campus. Yeah, so it's been busy. It's been great.
Yeah, and you can add Mike Hall Jr.'s departure to the NFL draft in there if you want. That's obviously not a transfer, although it is a move to a different level and another change to the roster. So Ryan Day had said last week, it was 83 was where he kind of viewed the scholarship numbers. Well, there's now even more room for Ohio State to potentially maneuver. But of these, to me, I think like the far more interesting conversation and far more relevant is what's going on at wide receiver, because the game has changed, right? I mean, it's weird to see that room take some of the scholarship number depth hit that it has, but you can also understand why that is.
Yeah, kind of. But you also can ask what people expect. I'm a player like Bryson Rogers, who was the clear-cut 4th best receiver in that class coming out of high school, needed development, came to Ohio State as a young man born in Ohio who dreamt of being a Buckeye his whole life, knew he needed years of development to be able to get ready to go, and to walk away after a year is surprising. And I don't know what the expectation is. I do think that people need to readjust the belief that Ohio State can have 9 or 10 like dudes at wide receiver. Like, that's just not going to happen. If you can get to 6 and then you have some walk-ons and lower rated guys after that, then cool. I just don't. I know that the conversations with players like Bryson Rogers and Noah Rogers as they came into Ohio State were predicated on this idea that you're coming to be a part of a process. You are not coming into play right away. If you are able to play right away, great. If you prove that you can do it, but that's not the expectation. And for Noah Rogers, a player from North Carolina who has always been sort of a homebody, was a lot of talk about him staying close to home at NC State throughout his process. I guess it's a little bit more understandable, especially as you look at Jeremiah Smith, another player that's of the same body type and same position as Noah Rogers is. But Bryson Rogers is a slot guy who's needs to gain 30 pounds before he can play in the Big Ten. It was just a little bit surprising. And I've seen a lot of complaints that it's because Ohio State doesn't rotate receivers. They played 7 receivers this year. I mean, not a lot, but also it's not like they had a lot of games this year where they were up by 30 points and you could just go in and play depth. So I'm not entirely sure that the Buckeyes could do anything different in these situations. I know that as of 2 weeks ago, there was no conversation about any of these guys leaving. A lot of kids went home before the bowl game. I think once you get home, people start to tell you how great you are. People start to tell you how you're being mistreated, or how other players have better NIL opportunities than you do, or they live, in an apartment and you live in a dorm, like whatever it is. I mean, I think people have completely lost sight of what this process of college football is supposed to be about, because there's a chance to get a lot of money without actually earning it.
I don't really understand the argument that getting these guys 10 or 15 reps is going to keep them out of the transfer portal.
I don't either. I think it actually would only increase the odds of them going to the portal.
I think it would give a better look. Oh, hey, I've got these reps on film. I was able to, or Ohio State let me play 5 snaps instead of Marvin Harrison Jr., which I don't think is a good decision for the benefit of the Ohio State Buckeyes offense at the time. I just I don't mean to, put the panic button out there. Maybe I'll knock on wood. Did the lack of reps for Jelani Thurman keep him from potentially understanding his role in the future and develop, or getting a lot of good practice reps by the end of the year? He was starting in the Cotton Bowl. Now that was a set of circumstances, but like, wide receiver is different than tight end. We talk about that all the time, the development and the path to the field and the way to get involved. It's like, it's not a perfect comparison that I'm making, but every position should be, to some level of degree, treated the same way to get on the field. True freshmen should not be playing at Ohio State. And if this becomes a situation where this becomes more frequent, where guys no longer accept the developmental plan, that throws a much bigger wrench into Ohio State, the way Ohio State approaches recruiting and approaches the transfer portal and all of its roster management, because it's predicated on people understanding that true freshmen are going to be behind very talented sophomores who are going to be behind very talented juniors. That's the way that you build a championship roster. And if they are no longer able to do that, then we're going to have to go back and have different conversations like we have around signing day, firm, where the money has to be different, or you have to eschew that level of recruiting totally. Like, that would change a lot for Ohio State if this becomes more frequent, which I don't know if it will or won't, but it's certainly a problem for this particular class.
Let me say this. I agree with everything you just said, except for the fact you said true freshmen shouldn't play at Ohio State. Let me say this. They shouldn't have to play at Ohio State.
Okay. Yeah.
There are players like Carnell Tate, for example, who's a wide receiver and a true freshman, who were too good not to play. And that's the difference. This argument that Ohio State doesn't play freshmen is silly, because Malik Hartford was starting in week 2. Carnell Tate was playing all year long. Luke Montgomery was playing all year long. The guys who were good enough to play played, and the guys who weren't didn't. And we've created this world where everyone thinks they're good enough to play as a freshman just because they are committed to Ohio State, and that's not true. And so ultimately, whatever the decision these kids make, it means Ohio State has just zero room for error in building their roster anymore. Bottom line, if it means you only have to take two wide receivers in every class, and it's the number 1 and number 2 player in the country at that spot, then I guess so be it. And then you fill in from the back portal. I asked Brian Hartline last week about, he's not taking a transfer at wide receiver in his 5 years as the position coach at Ohio State. That's going to change now. That has to change now. But it's not like you're going to go out there and bring in a 5-star transfer portal guy, because that guy's not going to come in and be the guy either. So you just lost Julian Fleming because he wants to be the number 1 guy somewhere, and he's not going to do that at Ohio State. So they're not going to find a number 1 guy in the portal. You need to find depth pieces and people who want that development. So it changes everything about the way they're going to need to approach not just wide receiver. I mean, that's the topic of this conversation, but the roster in general.
Why, if we are to assume right now anyway that they're going to have Emeka Ibuka back, why do they need to go get a receiver if they're going to have Ibuka, Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, Jeremiah Smith?
It's not for Saturdays. It's for Monday through Friday. It's for the year after. It's for finding guys and developing them, because when you have players like Carnell Tate, now he's heading into his 2nd year. That means he's got 2 years left. Jeremiah Smith has 3 years. It's about not having to play freshmen every single year, because that's all you have left on the roster. So you just you have to have guys to develop. And I think back, and people will always look at the guys that redshirted at Ohio State, the Michael Thomases, Terry McLaurin's, the Perry Campbell. I understand the world is different now. Terry McLaurin would not have stayed at Ohio State for 5 years in this current system. And Ohio State wouldn't have been able to let him stay for 5 years in this current system, because the world is changing. But if players are going to have incredibly high, crazy expectations of what should happen to them as a freshman, then the coaching staff needs to have crazy high expectations of what those guys are outputting. If you look at the photo, and this, I'm not trying to brag on anyone here, and I know it's going to come across that way, that I'm caping for the staff or I'm defending. The photo on the cover of this podcast on YouTube is a picture of Noah Rogers and Bryson Rogers looking to the crowd and waving to people after or in Friday's game. If you look behind them, you'll see the rest of the team is still huddling on the field. This was during the second quarter of the game. Okay. So like if that is the mindset that they have as a true freshman, hey, let's look for our family in the crowd instead of being in the huddle trying to learn. Like, are they giving, maybe they already checked out. I don't know. It's just like, if you are going to come in and expect, I demand to play as a freshman or I'm leaving, then you better demand, the coaches better be making major demands on you, or they need to be willing to say goodbye to you after your freshman year early, because there's no loyalty from the players. So the staff needs to be willing to be more cutthroat. And I think that's an adjustment that some Ohio State fans, and myself included, like, I believe big time in like loyalty and program development and player development, but I just don't know that you can do that anymore. Over.
I don't disagree with any of that. Bill, I want to go back to the point that you raised. You don't think that they would need to add another body at that wide receiver room?
I mean, I don't know that it's imperative. Byrne makes a good point about practice. Like, we don't ever consider practice when we think about transfer additions. And if you have like 7 scholarship receivers, you probably need more than that. I think ideally their number is 11, so they'd be like way under. We're probably entering a world, as both you guys have said, where keeping 11 scholarship receivers on the roster is nearly impossible, and maybe even keeping 9 or 10 is impossible. So maybe Ohio State needs to kind of readjust there. But I don't know that I look at the losses here and think to myself, man, they're screwed next year at receiver. Like, you're telling me Ohio State starting receivers next year are Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, Brandon Innes, and Jeremiah Smith. I'm like, okay, let's go. Well, I'm ready to roll with that. So I don't know that it's like, I'm not looking at it from that vantage point that they need to go get one. If there's like a guy who is coming off a freshman year where he didn't play a lot and like wants to come here and get developed and is okay with not necessarily being an early contributor at Ohio State and wants to be in a program for a few years, then by all means go get that guy. Or if there's like a veteran who doesn't necessarily want a ton of playing time but can come help like Emeka lead the room, then I think maybe go get a guy like that too. But I don't know that they need to go out and like find a starting wide receiver. I think they're just fine with what they have.
Yeah, they're not going to go out and find a starting receiver. That's the problem. But you also are here, as we said, again, this is prior to college football playoff games on Monday. Anything else can still happen. You have we have an understanding that players like Keon Grays and Kojo Antwi and Jaden Ballard, who we haven't even mentioned it to this point, like, aren't really being discussed as potential playing time guys next year. So do they need to? I mean, there's some big decisions now. Maybe 1 or 2 of those guys is willing to stick it out and keep developing, and I hope that's the case. Maybe all 3 of them are, but there's still potentially more losses coming from that room. And that's where things get even more like chaotic, because you're like, oh, well, maybe we actually do need a body or 2. Can you go get Sam Wiggles back?
Yeah, I think they should just go get Julian Fleming back. Honestly, I mean,
I think Julian Fleming has already picked up his truck at Penn State, so I think he's locked in there.
I understand the situation, but it's, when we look back and we talk,
the reason that Fleming left hasn't changed. So
I know, but like, why not just match the price? If you can avoid some of the headaches.
It's not only about price. He wants to be the number 1 receiver.
I mean, is he going to be Penn State's number 1 receiver?
Have you looked at Penn State's receivers?
I mean, I've watched a lot of Julian Fleming and I love his game, but is that what's going to unlock the Penn State passing attack?
Here's what I think. I think if you're Ohio State, you call Penn State and you make a trade and you say, we'll take Caden Saunders back. Here's a Central Ohio guy who needs to develop, who's put in a little time at your program. And he's a slot guy. He's a kick returner. And then, so these are the types of things that need to happen in college football from now on. Trades.
Wait, well, who are they sending? Julian Fleming?
It's already been.
It's too late.
And cash considerations and Julian Fleming.
Considerations.
Yeah.
How about this punter situation, Bill? Wow.
It's Missouri punter transfer too. Let's be clear.
Did he? I didn't see that. Yeah, I don't think I'm surprised. It's weird because Jesse Mirko's coming off, like I said, his best game. I think Ohio State needed a better punter, so I'm not surprised that I'm not like super privy to the conversations. I won't pretend to be, but I think Ohio State probably knows it needs to be better at punter than it has been the last few years. Like it's too far of a stretch to say they lost the Michigan game because they punted like crap, but it was certainly a factor in that game. And I don't think Jesse Mirko was really consistent throughout his entire career. And I don't think he has the strength to like really help you flip the field. And he did it in a Cotton Bowl. I understand that, but you have 3 years of a body of work there. And I just felt like it was really inconsistent, and his predecessors were excellent. So I think they need to get back to that level of punter, assuming one exists in the transfer portal. Believe it or not, for as much as I love punting, I have not examined the punting options in the transfer portal. So I don't really have any idea of what's out there. I just know that Ohio State needs to be better than it's been the last 3 years.
I entirely agree. But Austin, do you think there's any world where Ohio State was like, Jesse, you got to go? Or it was Jesse like, I need to be in the sunshine and I'm going to transfer to Miami and just enjoy the warm weather?
No, I believe that this was in the best interest of everybody involved. And
I agree.
I thought they had already offered another Australian.
Joe McGuire.
Yeah, they did bring one in. Yeah.
Joe McGuire is on the roster. He's like a 28-year-old.
Yeah. So I thought that the groundwork for this had already been laid. So like I already thought Jesse Mirko had been like, I'm moving on. So none of this came as a surprise to me when he went into the transfer portal. Like, and also he's quite old. I thought maybe he would just try and do something else other than play college football. So I was always under the impression that this was the end of the line for Jesse Mirko, but maybe I had concocted that scenario in my mind, but the replacement was already on hand.
Do you think there's a world where it was Saturday afternoon and the specialists got word that maybe their position coach was not going to return, and in defiance, Jesse Mirko stood up and said, I won't stand for this. I'm out of here.
No, I don't think that's a real world. Having known some specialists who've played for that coordinator, I would say that the level of respect for him is quite low.
That's spicy.
Well, hopefully he doesn't come back next year.
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, I said what I said.
Bottom line,
anyone disputes it.
Ohio State is going to be in a position here in the next couple of days where, the transfer portal expires on the 3rd, right? So that's one more day. There are decisions.
I think it's the 4th, but yeah, it is just a couple days.
So there are key decisions that are, again, like we've talked about this for the last month, and I know people get pissed off, but like they're in this weird roster purgatory because all these guys haven't announced what they're doing. Now, maybe there's internal discussions, but I think people would be surprised at how little other players know about what each other is doing in these locker rooms. I don't think that they are all privy to what each player is thinking. But players like Kenyatta Jackson, who we saw on Saturday tweeting decisions. He played a lot in the Cotton Bowl, probably more snaps than he's played in the game all year, I would imagine. And Ohio State desperately wants to keep him in the fold, but like if JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are back, what is he going to do? Like there are still major pieces of this 2024 team that could be moving on by Thursday without really Ohio State having the ability to stop it. And that's what's so crazy about this whole thing. I just don't. I'm all for player empowerment, but like, man, this feels like chaos. And the NCAA is getting all the reward, and the teams are getting all of the suck.
I don't know if the NCAA is getting rewarded.
Yeah, look at all the interest. Look at all the. They're making more money than ever.
The NCAA, they don't make any money. They're all the schools.
People are walking around wearing NCAA hats.
You know what I mean? The NCAA and TV. You know what I mean?
One of those?
Yeah, the NCAA and the TV people.
Classic scenario.
Making all the
just to be clear, the window to enter the portal closes this week, but you can add anybody who's in there, whatever the hell you want, right?
Yes, but I'm worried about the guys leaving Ohio State.
Got it.
Not.
Do we want to talk about the addition that they made?
Yeah,
let's do it.
I mean, why would we not? They did make an addition.
You talked to the guy, bro.
Yeah, you talked to him. What did you learn, bro?
Tell us all about him. You guys do it.
You talk to him.
You talk to him.
Yeah. Will, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, so say it.
Camera check. Is that it?
I do that every Kamaric? Kamaric?
Kamaric? All right.
Probably Kamaric. 6'6", 252.
Didn't you ask him?
No, I mean we weren't on the phone. It was just text messaging. I wasn't going to ask him to get phonetic with me.
Oh, okay.
Weird.
What do you? All right. So Ohio State picked up.
I'll tell you this. I received a text message on Sunday, early morning on Sunday. It was not early morning. Sorry, it was like 12:30, 1 o'clock, saying
it's early.
Don't knock the edition until you watch the film. And I was like, did I miss something? I'm at lunch. Like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. And then I saw the tweet from Will Kekmerick, and I'm like, oh, okay. Well, then I watched the film, and you're like, 6'6", 255, runs well, physical blocker. I was told by a source at the Woody that they think he's the best tight end available in the portal. Now, I admittedly haven't looked down the list of every tight end that's available, but this is a kid who in the class of 2021 was unranked by rivals.com, a 2-star by 247 Sports, played defensive end most of the way through high school, transitioned to playing mostly offense by the time he was a senior in high school. But there's a lot to like on the film. I mean, I take it. You always take comparisons with a grain of salt, but the words I were told were a bigger, faster version of Cade Stover. So that's pretty good. And it's a player that's actually been playing tight end for going into his 4th year now. He has 2 years of eligibility. The tight end room is one we talked about for the last month about probably needing to add a body. And there's a number of reasons for that, because you have G. Scott expected to return, Bennett Christian expected to return, Jelani Thurman expected to return. Now you add Will Kekmerick, and then you have 2 freshmen in Max LeBlanc and Demarion Witten. Sam Hart, I would expect to not be back on the Ohio State roster. You don't know if Demarion Witten's going to maybe play wide receiver because of the other stuff we've talked about earlier, so there's a possibility for that to happen. Bennett Christian obviously sat out this entire year because of the PED suspension. G. Scott is not a true tight end, but you have 3 guys at 6'6", 255 with Bennett Christian, Jelani Thurman, and now Will Kekmerick. And then you have your H-back type in G. Scott. You take some of the pressure off G having to block because he doesn't do it very well. And then you let Max LeBlanc start to develop. And I think it's a really, really good room moving forward for Ohio State. And I fully expect this guy to be the starting tight end for Ohio State come August.
I think trying to put the Cade Stover expectations, we'll see what happens. That seems like a lot, because Cade's got a case to be one of the most productive tight ends in Ohio State history. So if he can give Luke Farrell production, I think that would be pretty good. Really consistent blocking. You can assist a little bit in the passing attack. It looked last year, he had at least 1 catch in every single game except Ohio's last one in their bowl game. 23 catches, I believe, overall, and a couple touchdowns. That would be A-okay. If they could get that, if Ohio State could get the exact same thing from him next year and a little more consistency on with the edge blocking, that's a win. So I don't think he has to be a better version of Cade Stover. I think getting a Farrell type would be a win.
Farrell, wild.
Farrell wild man.
Yeah, I don't care. He can catch 0 passes at Ohio State. And I know he wants to catch more than that. But their tight end blocking has been terrible since Luke Farrell left. So if he can help them there, then I'm all for it.
Yeah. All right.
He can help them there. That's for sure. Cut that tape on.
For sure. We know
Farrell.
There's room for more. So there's going to be more portal activity. That this roster is going to continue to change. A lot of room for the Buckeyes to add before they get back out there in spring football in March. And as all these developments come, we'll continue to follow it on the podcast and on the podcast daily. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday edition, the first one of 2024 with y'all. Hope you enjoyed it. For Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham, I'm Austin Ward. We'll talk to you tomorrow.